The phone rang at 10:47 p.m. On the dot, the way it had for the last 103 nights, and I already knew who it was before I even picked it up. My son, my only child. The boy I raised on this land while his father hauled lumber through blizzards and fixed fences by lantern light. The boy I fed, the boy I prayed over, the boy I sat up with when his fever wouldn't break. And yet, for 3 months straight, every night at the same minute, his voice had carried the same cold question, like a security protocol, like he was filling out a form, not talking to his mother. "Mom, are you alone? Not, how are you? Did you sleep last night? Does the hip still hurt? Are you managing the snow? Just that. Are you alone?" And if I said no, he stayed on and poked and poked and poked. "Who's there? How long will they stay? Why didn't you tell me? Why is the mudroom light on? Did you lock the kitchen door?" But if I said yes, if I admitted I was what he wanted me to be, a woman in a big farmhouse with nothing but creaking boards and widow's memories for company, the line went dead. No good night. No, I love you. No, see you tomorrow. Just a click. It took me 103 nights to realize that my answer was not easing his worry. It was triggering someone else's move. That night, the wind was working the old maple by the drive and the orchard looked like a line of bones against the November sky. I was sitting in Thomas's armchair, the one by the window, the one that still had the shape of him even though he'd been in the ground 2 years. I was turning his reading glasses over in my hand and asking myself, not for the first time, why I still kept them on the side table. You can't call the dead back with objects. You can't warm a house with memories. But you can hold on to habits because they make you feel less alone. The phone rang. I didn't even look at the screen. "Hi, Caleb." Tight breath on the other end. Everything about him was tight now. His schedule, his voice, his thinking. "Mom, are you alone?" I looked around the living room, as if that would change anything. I saw the floral sofa we bought on credit 30 years ago, the grandfather clock my mother left me, the wedding photo over the mantel where I looked too young to own land and Thomas looked like he could carry the world. The house was not just empty. It was echoing. It had that hollow sound houses get when the man who filled them is gone. I should have said no. I should have said the sheriff stopped by. I should have said the neighbor was here dropping off pie. I should have said anything except what came out of my mouth. "Yes, I'm alone." He hung up. Just like that. But the house did not return to its normal quiet. Silence sat wrong, a nervous, holding its breath kind of quiet. I've lived on this farm for 41 years. I know every sound it makes. I know the furnace cough. I know the way snow slides off the roof. I know how the porch settles when the temperature drops. So when the kitchen door handle turned, I knew down to the marrow that it wasn't the wind. I always locked that door after supper. Every night. Habit is how women in the country stay alive. I didn't move. I was still in the armchair, tucked just out of sight of the kitchen doorway. If whoever was at that door looked in, they would think the room was empty. The handle tried again. Slow. Testing. Then it stopped. Footsteps on the gravel. Moving away. I should have been relieved. I wasn't. Because I knew what that meant. Whoever had tried the door had needed to know one thing before coming in, whether I was alone, and I had just told my son I was. I stood, legs shaky, and went to the kitchen. That was when I saw it. A white envelope, heavy, expensive, unsealed, sitting in the exact center of my kitchen table. I hadn't put it there. I hadn't heard the door open, but it was there, which meant the person at the door hadn't left because I scared them off. They left because their job was done. They had delivered the message. I should have called the sheriff. That is what any sensible person watching from a couch miles away would say. But lonely farm women do not always call the law. We assess. We remember who we are. We ask whether calling in men with badges will fix it or make it worse. I stood under the kitchen light and opened the envelope. One photo. Our house. Our orchard. But from 30 years ago, when the barn was still red and the apple trees were still thin, Thomas, young and straight-backed, me, barely 35, hair still dark, holding baby Caleb, and 2 strangers. A tall man in a city coat with his hand on Thomas's shoulder the way a man does when he has bought another man. A woman with a hard mouth, standing just far enough away to show she didn't like posing with us. On the back, 4 words and a year, the arrangement, 1994, some obligations never die. My heart lurched. 1994 was the year Thomas inherited money out of nowhere and came home saying, "We can buy it, Marge. All 112 acres, cash." He said a relative died. He said it fast, like he wanted the words out of his mouth, but Thomas never had a relative with that kind of money. I knew it then, and I didn't ask, because honest wives sometimes close their eyes when the dream they've prayed for is placed on the table. Now, 2 years after he's dead, someone was telling me the bill for that dream had come due. Before I could sit down, the phone rang again. Not Caleb. Blocked number. Boston area cadence. "Mrs. Ellis? My name is Jonathan Reed. I've been trying to reach you, but your son keeps telling me you're confused. Please don't hang up. I'm on my way to your house right now. I have to give you something your husband was supposed to tell you 31 years ago. And I have reason to believe your son is trying to get control of your property before you see it." That was the moment I understood the nightly calls were not love. They were surveillance. They were logging. They were making a record that I was always alone, so that one day, very soon, a judge in town could read a stack of papers and say, "Yes, of course, this older woman can no longer manage 112 acres. Give power of attorney to the good son." If you're watching this video and you've ever had that sinking feeling that someone in your own family is checking on you a little too often, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. We love knowing how far these stories of older women fighting back are traveling, because every time one of us tells the truth, it makes it harder for anyone to lock us away quietly. Now I want to know what kind of person you are. Imagine you were me in that kitchen, holding that envelope, knowing someone just tried your door right after your son asked if you were alone. Which would you do? A. Call the sheriff right away, even if it drags the whole town into your business. Or B. Stay quiet for a moment and find out first what exactly your son has been hiding from you. Tell me A or B and tell me why I really want to read what you would do. The headlights cut across my living room like a blade, slicing through the lace curtains Thomas had insisted we keep after his mother's death. For a second I thought it was Jonathan Reed, the Boston attorney who'd promised to reach me before my son did. But I knew that car. It was Caleb's truck. He'd said he'd come in the morning. Yet here he was, rolling up my drive in the middle of the night. I turned off the kitchen light and stood in the dark, my heart hammering so hard I could hear it. The gravel crunched, the truck door opened, and his voice, my own child's voice, called my name with a cheerfulness that sounded rehearsed. "Mom, you still up? I brought you soup." The key turned in the front door before I could move. He still had it, of course. He stepped inside like he owned the air I breathed, wearing that look of forced patience I used to see when he was 8 and wanted to lecture me about why his curfew was unfair. "Mom, you scared me half to death. Why didn't you answer my call?" "I was sleeping," I lied. He set a paper bag on the table, the smell of chicken broth filling the room, and looked around, eyes scanning the walls, the counters, the phone. He wasn't here about soup. His eyes weren't looking for his mother. They were searching for evidence. "You've been talking to someone, haven't you? Some lawyer?" "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do." His tone sharpened. "Jonathan Reed called me this evening. Told me you're being harassed by your loving son. That's what he said. I told him you're not well, that you get confused, that I'd handle everything." "Handle what?" He ignored the question, walking deeper into the house. "Do you know what happens when people your age get scammed? They lose everything. Their house, their savings, their dignity. That man is trying to use you." But it wasn't Reed who was using me. It was my own flesh and blood. The thought hit me so hard I could barely speak. "What did you tell him?" "That I'm your power of attorney," he said smoothly. "That I'm handling your finances now. That you can't be making major legal decisions. You remember signing that, right?" I hadn't signed anything of the sort. I opened my mouth, but he cut me off. "Mom, I need to protect you from people like him. You know how much you depend on me. You can't live out here alone forever. I've already talked to a doctor in town about your memory lapses." Memory lapses. The phrase was so clean, so polished, it almost sounded medical. My stomach turned. "You're making things up." "Am I?" He moved toward Thomas's old desk, the one that held every letter, every tax record, every scrap of the life we'd built together. "What's this then?" He pulled open the drawer I'd forgotten to lock. Thomas's last note lay there, folded and worn. Caleb lifted it and read it aloud, his voice tight with discovery. "If you are reading this, I am gone. The key opens box 312 at First National in Burlington. Go alone. Tell no one, especially not Caleb." The words hung between us like smoke. He set the paper down and stared at me, and for the first time that night, I saw what had replaced love in his eyes. Fear. Not for me, but of what that letter might reveal. "What's in the box, Mom?" "I don't know," I said, and it was true. "Yes, you do." He leaned closer. "You've been hiding things. I've been patient. But this is dangerous. People have been asking questions about Dad, about this land. I'm trying to keep you out of trouble, but you're not making it easy." He was trembling slightly. His voice wasn't cruel, it was desperate. I could hear in every syllable that someone had filled his head with promises. "Caleb, who's been talking to you?" He looked away. "You don't need to know that." "I do." "Enough," he said, suddenly loud. "Pack a bag. We're leaving. I found a place in town, a nice apartment. I can't keep driving 2 hours every time you imagine things. You're coming with me tonight." "I'm not going anywhere." "You are," he said, and the tone was final. "Because if you don't, tomorrow I'll go before a judge with your medical reports. They'll sign the guardianship order before you finish breakfast, and then, legally, you won't get to decide anything anymore." The way he said legally made me sick. That word used like a weapon. My knees felt weak, but I forced myself to stand tall. "You're not taking my home." He sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose the way his father used to do when he'd lost patience. "Mom, I'm doing this for you. You've been through enough. You don't understand how complicated things have gotten. Dad's business wasn't clean. He left debts. People are calling. You can't fight them. Let me deal with it." He didn't see me move toward the stairs. He thought I'd surrendered. But I was already planning. Upstairs, the window of the guest room opened onto the trellis Thomas built in 1987. It had held roses once. It could hold me now. "I'll go pack," I said. "Give me 5 minutes." He nodded, relieved. "Good. I'll warm the truck." I went upstairs, shut the door, and locked it. My heart was slamming so loud it seemed to fill the whole house. I took only what mattered: Thomas's note, my ID, the old brass key that matched the number in the letter. Then I opened the window. The cold cut through my lungs like glass. Below, the driveway glowed faintly under the headlights. Caleb's truck idled. I could hear him talking on the phone. "She found the note. We'll have to move up the timetable." His pause was short. "Yes, I know what she has. Don't worry. I'll bring her in." Another voice answered him through the speaker, low and steady, not his wife's. "If she runs, make sure she doesn't reach Burlington." My hands froze around the window frame. The voice didn't belong to anyone I knew, but it carried the easy confidence of someone used to owning people. Whoever it was, that man was giving orders and my son was obeying them. I didn't wait to hear more. I swung my legs over the sill, found the trellis, and climbed down. The wood creaked beneath me, brittle with cold, but it held. I hit the ground running, my breath turning white in the dark. Every nerve in my body was shouting, "Go!" I didn't take the road. I took the orchard. My boots sank into frost. I slipped between the bare trees, the ghosts of apples hanging like ornaments of another life. Behind me, the front door banged open. "Mom!" Caleb shouted. "Mom, stop!" I kept moving until the lights of the house were gone. At the far edge of the orchard stood the old shed, and beyond it the fence line that met County Road 17. If I could make it that far, I could reach the diner. I could meet Jonathan Reed before Caleb stopped me. I ducked into the shed, heart pounding, and waited. Through the crack in the boards, I saw Caleb on the porch, phone still in hand, talking to someone in that same low tone of submission. Another pair of headlights appeared, turning onto the drive from the main road. A sedan this time. Not Caleb's truck. The lawyer. He'd made it. I watched as he stepped out, flashed a badge or document at my son, and tried to get to the door. Caleb blocked him. Reed gestured sharply, then returned to his car and parked near the road, engine running, lights off, waiting. The two of them stood there in the wind, my son and a stranger, and for the first time, I realized I wasn't the only one being hunted. Reed was racing the same clock I was. Then a third set of headlights appeared far down the lane. Slow, expensive, deliberate. An SUV, black and gleaming. When the driver stepped out, even at that distance I could tell what kind of man he was. Not local, not kind. He didn't look at the house or the lawyer. He looked straight toward the orchard, as if he already knew where the real secret of this land was buried. I pressed my back to the shed wall and tried to breathe quietly. Everything, the phone calls, the envelope, the photo, my husband's strange windfall in 1994 was starting to line up. Caleb wasn't working alone. He was the weak link in someone else's chain, and that chain was tightening around me fast. In the cold silence of that shed, I made a choice. I would not wait for a savior. I would meet Reed myself. And when I did, I would find out what my husband had done, what he'd buried on this land, and why people were willing to use my son to steal it. Because one thing was clear now. This wasn't about love. It was about inheritance and power and secrets older than my marriage, and I wasn't going to let them take what I'd already paid for with my life. By the time I reached the diner, dawn had begun to smear the sky with pale light, the kind of light that doesn't bring warmth, only clarity. My boots were wet, my lungs raw, and my mind sharp in a way it hadn't been in years. I slipped into a corner booth, away from the windows, and wrapped my hands around the chipped mug the waitress brought me without asking. She must have seen the tremor in my fingers and decided not to speak. Small-town kindness, quiet, instinctive, and bound by unspoken rules. When the bell over the door rang, I almost spilled the coffee. Jonathan Reed was younger than I'd expected. Mid-40s, maybe. Gray at the temples, careful in his movements. He scanned the room, spotted me, and approached with the caution of a man who's been followed before. "Mrs. Ellis?" he asked quietly. I nodded. He sat down across from me and didn't waste a second. "I need you to listen carefully. What I'm about to tell you will make sense of what's been happening at your house." He placed a sealed envelope on the table. It bore the crest of a law firm in Boston I'd never heard of. Inside were copies of two documents. One was a notarized statement from a man named William Morse, dated 1994. The other was a letter of instruction written by my late husband, Thomas Ellis. My heart lurched at the sight of his handwriting. The loops of his letters were still the same, the ink slightly smudged by his left hand. Jonathan tapped the Morse statement first. Mr. Morse was an accountant. In 1994, he and your husband worked out an arrangement involving the purchase of your farm. The price listed on record was $120,000, but the real value of the property was close to $3 million at the time. Your husband didn't buy it from the previous owner. He acquired it from a company that was trying to hide assets during a federal audit. In exchange for keeping silent, they paid him with the deed. I stared at him, words catching in my throat. "You're saying Thomas laundered money?" "I'm saying he took a payment to protect your family. It wasn't greed. The men behind that company were dangerous. He used the money to buy safety, not luxury. He tried to get out years later, but once you're in that circle, you never really leave." I wanted to argue, to tell him my husband wasn't the kind of man who made deals with criminals. But then I remembered the envelopes Thomas used to lock in the desk, the nights he came home smelling of city smoke instead of diesel. I remembered the way he avoided questions about those trips. My whole marriage, there had been corners I never entered, doors I didn't open. Now I understood why. Jonathan continued, his tone lower. "Mr. Morse died 2 months ago. Before he did, he left a final statement with our firm. He said your husband hid evidence documents, ledgers, bank transfers, proof of the laundering scheme, and that someone was still looking for them." I took a deep breath. "Who?" "His name is James Carver. He was a partner in the original company. He served time for tax fraud, but he's been out for years. He's been trying to find the evidence your husband kept. If he gets it back, he can erase his trail completely." The name hit me like a physical blow. That was the same voice I'd heard on the phone, the one giving orders to my son. Jonathan watched my reaction closely. "I'm guessing you've heard that name before." "Not the name," I said, "but the voice." He leaned forward. "Then you understand why we can't go through official channels yet. If Carver has influence in this county, he could corrupt the process. We need to move quietly. The evidence your husband hid, it's likely the only thing keeping you alive right now. And it's not in the safety deposit box. The letter in there is just directions." I opened Thomas's note again and read it with new eyes. The key wasn't the treasure, it was the map. "The orchard," I whispered. "He said something about the apple tree." Jonathan nodded. "Exactly. He left a duplicate record at the bank in Burlington so it wouldn't disappear if someone searched the house. But the real files are still here, buried somewhere on your land." I sat back, dizzy from the flood of information. Everything I thought I knew about my husband, my son, my life, it was shifting under my feet. Caleb said there were debts. He said people were calling about Dad's business. Jonathan's expression hardened. "That's Carver's doing. He's manipulating your son. Probably promised him control of the property if he cooperates. Guardianship would give Carver what he wants: legal authority to seize everything under the pretext of managing your affairs." The words scraped something raw inside me. "My son wouldn't," I stopped. I had seen the fear in Caleb's eyes. Fear doesn't come from imagination. It comes from being owned. Jonathan placed his hands flat on the table. "We have two options. We can go straight to the FBI in Burlington with what we have now, or we can go back to the farm and find the originals before Carver does. Once we have them, we'll have proof to stop this for good." I thought about the house, about the photographs on the walls, the scent of wood smoke still clinging to Thomas's chair. The orchard was more than soil and trees. It was the story of our life together. If they took that, there would be nothing left of me. "We go back," I said. Jonathan nodded once, as if he'd expected that answer. "Then we need to move fast. Carver will already know I made contact." He paid the bill in cash, left a generous tip, and we slipped out the back door. His car was parked in the alley behind the diner, a dark sedan with a Massachusetts plate. The air was sharp and metallic. Snow had begun to fall, whispering against the hood. As we drove, Jonathan handed me a folder. Inside are photos and addresses of everyone tied to Carver's network. If something happens to me, go to Agent Sharon Morrison in Burlington. She's the only one I trust. I nodded, clutching the folder to my chest like armor. The highway unspooled ahead of us, silver under the dawn. The trees rose like witnesses on either side. I thought about Caleb again, my boy, who used to leave wildflowers on my pillow, who once built a birdhouse just to make me smile. What kind of love turns into something you can't recognize? Jonathan's voice broke my thoughts. "Mrs. Ellis, you should know something else. There's a second name on the Morse document. A beneficiary. It's not you or your husband." "Who then?" He hesitated. "Caleb Ellis." The sound of his name twisted the air between us. My husband had included our son in a secret arrangement decades ago, maybe as insurance, maybe as guilt. Either way, Carver had known. And now he was using that fact to turn Caleb against me. I closed my eyes and forced myself to breathe. If my husband trusted our son with that, he believed he was good once. Maybe I can still reach that part of him. Jonathan looked at me, something like respect flickering across his face. "You might be the only one who can." We drove in silence for a while longer. Then, as the outline of the farm came into view over the hill, I saw something that made my stomach drop, a thin column of smoke rising from the direction of the house. Jonathan pressed harder on the gas. The road curved, revealing the full view. My kitchen window was glowing orange. Flames. I didn't speak. There was nothing to say. The home I'd built, the walls that had held my marriage, my son's childhood, my secrets, it was all burning. But beneath that fire was something deeper, something older. The truth Thomas left behind. And I knew, without needing to see it, that the apple tree still stood. Because that's where he'd hidden the real evidence. The roots of everything we'd ever buried were still there, waiting to be unearthed. Jonathan drove faster than I thought possible on that winding road. The wipers swept rhythmically, useless against the freezing rain that had begun to fall, and the old trees lining the drive bowed under the wind like silent witnesses. When we crested the last hill, the sight below stole my breath. The farmhouse was half lit by firelight. My house. The windows glowed orange, and a column of smoke twisted upward into the bruised dawn. "Stay in the car," Jonathan said, but I was already out, boots sinking into the mud. The smell hit first burning pine, paper, old varnish. I ran toward the porch, my coat snagging on the fence, heart hammering in my ears. A figure was silhouetted in the doorway. My son. "Caleb!" I shouted. The sound of his name cracked in the air. He turned, startled, then furious. "Mom, you shouldn't be here." "What did you do?" "I didn't do anything," he said, but his voice broke. Behind him I could see Rachel, his wife, throwing papers into the kitchen sink and striking a match. The fire leapt higher. Jonathan came up beside me, flashing a badge. "Put it out!" he barked. Rachel froze. "You don't have the right to be here," Caleb shouted back, but there was fear in his eyes now, not authority. Jonathan stepped forward. "You're destroying evidence in a federal investigation. That's a felony, son." Caleb's gaze darted between us, calculating. "You don't understand there's money missing. People will come after her if we don't fix this." "By burning her life down?" Jonathan said. Rachel grabbed Caleb's arm. "We have to go." That was when I saw the black SUV crawling up the drive, slow, deliberate, the same one I'd glimpsed the night before from the orchard. Jonathan's hand went instinctively to his jacket pocket where I knew he carried his gun. He wasn't law enforcement, but he'd said he had temporary authority. Whatever that meant, it was enough to make him stand taller now. "Inside," he whispered. "We need the files before they do." I didn't want to step through that door, not with the smoke thickening, but I did. The kitchen was chaos, drawers yanked open, my wedding china shattered, Thomas's old clock lying on the floor. And yet amid the wreckage, something caught my eye, a thin, dark trail of ash leading toward the cellar. "Down there," I said. Jonathan hesitated. "Is there another exit?" "No, just the coal chute." We went down together. The air was colder, damp, heavy with earth. The light from above cast bars across the wall, and in that shifting glow I saw it an iron box half buried behind the foundation stones. Thomas had always told me not to store things there, said the floor was unstable. He'd been hiding this. Jonathan knelt, brushing away dirt, then pried the lid open. Inside were 3 items: a bundle of papers wrapped in oilcloth, an old ledger bound in red leather, and a small cassette tape labeled in Thomas's handwriting, "For when they come." My throat closed. Jonathan lifted the tape carefully. "We need to get this out of here. Now." Footsteps above us, heavy, deliberate, the kind of tread that doesn't belong to a son or a neighbor. Jonathan motioned for silence and reached for his weapon. "There's a side window?" I pointed to the far wall where the coal chute opened. We crawled through just as a beam of light swept across the cellar stairs. The SUV door slammed above. Voices, 2 men, one I recognized. James Carver. He wasn't shouting. His tone was almost casual. "You really thought she'd just hand it over, didn't you? You raised an honest man, Marjorie." Jonathan pushed me forward. "Go." We stumbled into the orchard, the wind cutting sharp against my face. The house behind us was fully engulfed now. The fire cracked like gunfire. Jonathan turned to look back once. "They'll think we're dead. That's to our advantage." We ran until the trees swallowed the last of the smoke. The barn loomed ahead, half collapsed, but still standing. We ducked inside, lungs burning. Jonathan leaned against a beam, listening. No pursuit yet. He took out the tape and held it up. "Whatever's on this, it's worth more than land. It's proof." I stared at the tiny reel of plastic. My husband's voice, trapped in there for 30 years. "Play it," I said. He hesitated, then produced a small recorder from his coat. The tape hissed, then crackled to life. Thomas's voice filled the barn, weary but firm. "If you're hearing this, it means Carver came back." I couldn't stop him in '94, but I left what he wants buried where no man of his kind would look under the oldest apple tree, the one that never dies. The ledger you found is only a copy. The originals, the bank records, and the confession are sealed in a metal drum 6 feet down. If they dig, they'll find more than paper. They'll find proof that the Morses and Carver laundered the money through a veterans fund. And if they touch it, the state police will have them on murder, not just fraud. The tape clicked off. I realized I'd been crying silently. Jonathan rewound it once, pocketed the cassette, and looked at me. He gave us exactly what we need. From outside came the low growl of engines. 2 of them now. They're searching the property, he said. We can't stay. But I wasn't leaving. Not yet. That tree's our only chance. We dig tonight. Marjorie, if they catch us, if we run, they'll burn what's left. You said yourself Carver's desperate. He'll never stop until he finds what's under that tree. He saw the resolve in my face and gave a short nod. Then we move now, before they secure the perimeter. We slipped out the back of the barn, hugging the shadows. The orchard stretched wide and black, each tree a ghost in the snowlight. My breath came in quick, sharp bursts. Every sound, the creak of branches, the crunch of frost felt magnified. Halfway there, Jonathan grabbed my arm and pulled me behind a trunk. Flashlights were sweeping the field. Carver's men, methodical, confident. They were searching in lines, moving toward the apple tree. We waited until they passed, then crawled forward. The ground at the base of the old tree was harder than stone, frozen solid. Jonathan swung the small shovel he'd taken from the barn, each strike ringing in the quiet. I knelt beside him, digging with my bare hands, the dirt biting into my nails. After what felt like hours, the blade hit metal. A muffled clang. We cleared the earth away, revealing the rim of a steel drum sealed with bolts. Jonathan pried it open, and inside lay folders wrapped in plastic and a second cassette labeled "Copy for the State." He lifted it reverently. Behind us, a shout. "They're here!" Flashlights cut through the dark. Jonathan shoved the evidence into his coat. "Run!" We bolted through the orchard as bullets cracked against the trunks. The sound of sirens rose in the distance, sharp, rising, close. I didn't know whether it was salvation or another trap, but it made Carver's men hesitate. Jonathan pushed me ahead. "Keep moving!" By the time we reached the fence line, blue lights were flickering through the trees. Sheriff's cars, Carver's men scattered. Jonathan turned to me, breathless, eyes bright. "You just lived through the hardest part. The rest is justice." I looked back once at the burning house, at the orchard glowing faintly under the dawn. The oldest apple tree still stood, untouched by flame, roots deep and defiant. It was proof of everything we'd survived and everything we were about to uncover. The sheriff's sirens broke the night like an alarm clock you don't remember setting. Red and blue lights strobed across the orchard, painting the snow with flashes of panic and relief. I sank against the fence post, lungs burning, my hands raw from digging. Jonathan's coat was torn, mud up to his knees, but his grip on that steel drum was iron. "We made it," he whispered, though the sound of engines still echoed through the valley. 2 patrol cars skidded to a stop. Sheriff Daniels stepped out, coat collar turned up against the cold. He had been a friend of Thomas's once, back when men still shook hands on fences instead of in courtrooms. Now his expression was wary. "Marjorie Ellis?" he called, scanning the orchard with his flashlight. "Ma'am, you need to come with us." Jonathan raised his badge. "Federal liaison. She's under protection. There's a federal warrant on James Carver." Daniels eyed the badge, then turned back to me. "You sure about this, Marge? These are big accusations." "Come see for yourself," I said. "Everything's here." The deputies followed Jonathan to the tree, where the half-dug hole yawned like a wound in the earth. He pried open the steel drum again. The flashlights illuminated folders, stamped with bank seals, transaction logs, and typed confessions signed by names I didn't know until I saw one I did. Caleb Ellis, my son's name. On the line marked beneficiary, the ground tilted. "He didn't know what he was signing," I said quickly. "He was a boy." Jonathan nodded slightly, a silent promise to help me later, but Daniels was already calling for evidence bags. "We'll sort this in town," the sheriff said. "Too cold for truth out here." As they loaded the drum into the cruiser, a figure appeared on the edge of the orchard, stumbling between the trees. Rachel. Her hair was wild, her coat half burned, and her eyes were wide with something between terror and remorse. "They left him!" she cried. "Carver, he took Caleb." Jonathan grabbed her shoulders. "When?" "Minutes ago. Black SUV. Headed north." She clutched at my arm. "He said he was sorry, Marjorie. He said he thought he could fix it." Her words pierced through the numbness. I didn't feel fear, only the old, bone-deep instinct of a mother who refuses to let go. "We're going after him," I said. Jonathan didn't argue. Within minutes, we were in the sheriff's vehicle, tearing down the icy road with the sirens still howling. The radio crackled with updates, roadblocks forming, federal backup en route. But all I could hear was the echo of my son's voice on those nightly calls. "Are you alone?" Now I understood. He hadn't been checking on me. He'd been making sure the men listening on the other end knew when to move. We caught sight of the SUV on Route 17, its taillights swaying across the curves like blood-colored eyes. Jonathan spoke into his radio, voice clipped. "Target visual confirmed. Maintain distance." Daniels gunned the engine. "He's heading for the ridge. Dead end up there." The chase was brief but brutal. The SUV fishtailed on the frozen road, slammed into a snowbank, and stopped. Two men jumped out, Carver and another I didn't recognize, dragging Caleb between them. He wasn't fighting, just pleading, his face white in the headlights. Jonathan was out of the car before it stopped moving. "Federal agents! Drop him!" Carver laughed, the sound slick and cruel. "You think this woman's worth a federal case? She's just a farmer's widow sitting on 30 years of dirty paper." Jonathan leveled his gun. "Those papers will bury you." Carver pulled Caleb closer, pressing a gun to his ribs. "Then let's make a trade. Her husband sold his soul for this land. Now she can sell hers to save her son." I stepped forward before Jonathan could stop me. "James," I said, my voice steady, "you don't want me. You want what's buried. It's gone. The police have it. The FBI's waiting in Burlington. You're finished." He sneered. "I've been finished before." But he underestimated what age gives you the kind of courage that comes when you've lost everything already. I kept walking, slowly, hands raised. Behind me I could hear Jonathan shifting position. Caleb's eyes met mine, desperate and wet. "Mom, don't." "It's all right," I said. "This ends now." For one terrible second, Carver's attention flickered toward the lights cresting the hill. Jonathan seized the opening. A single gunshot cracked through the cold, then another. The echo rolled down the ridge like thunder. When the smoke cleared, Carver was on the ground. Caleb was on his knees, sobbing. Jonathan holstered his weapon, breathing hard. "He's alive," he said. "Barely. Let the sheriff handle the rest." I went to my son. His face was streaked with dirt and regret. "I didn't know," he kept saying. "He said you'd go to prison. He said Dad stole everything." I touched his cheek, the way I used to when he was small. "You believed him because you were scared. But fear doesn't erase what you've done." He nodded, crying harder. "I'll fix it." "No," I said softly. "You'll tell the truth. That's the only thing left to fix." By dawn, the road was a crime scene. Carver was airlifted to a hospital under guard. Rachel gave her statement through tears. Caleb sat in the back of a cruiser, head bowed, waiting to sign his confession. Jonathan stood beside me as the sun rose, painting the sky a bruised gold. "You saved him," he said quietly. "No," I replied. "He's still got to save himself." Back in town, the news spread fast. By noon, reporters were outside the sheriff's office. "Widow exposes 30-year laundering ring," one headline read. But I didn't care about fame. I only wanted to breathe again, to know that Thomas's ghosts could finally rest. Later, at the station, Jonathan handed me a small evidence bag. Inside was the cassette we'd found in the drum, the second recording. "You should hear it," he said. "He made it for you." I took the bag to a quiet corner and pressed play. Thomas's voice filled the room once more, softer this time, like he'd been sitting at our kitchen table when he recorded it. "Marjorie, if this reaches you, it means I failed to protect our boy from the truth. I did what I did so he could grow up without fear, but fear always finds its way home. Don't let him drown in my mistakes. The land belongs to you because you were the only one who ever worked it with clean hands. Whatever happens, remember you were always the strong one." I turned off the tape, my vision blurring. For the first time in weeks, the silence felt gentle. Jonathan approached quietly. "What will you do now?" "Bury what's left," I said. "Not the evidence, the past." He nodded. "You've earned that." That night, as I drove back toward what remained of the farm, I saw the apple tree standing against the winter sky, its branches bare but unbroken. The house was gone, the fields were scarred, but the roots, those deep, stubborn roots, were still there, just like me. The snow melted fast that spring, as if the land itself wanted to wash away what had happened. For weeks after the arrests, the farm was a cordoned-off battlefield yellow tape around blackened beams, investigators combing the ashes for anything Carver's men hadn't already destroyed. I stayed at a small motel in town, the kind of place that smelled of old coffee and disinfectant, where the clerk never asked questions. Each morning, I drove past what used to be my home and watched as the ground thawed, revealing what the fire couldn't erase. Caleb's trial came first. The prosecution was merciful. He had cooperated, surrendered every document, every message, every bank transfer Carver had forced him to send. The plea deal spared him prison, but not shame. When I saw him in the courtroom, sitting at the defense table in that too large gray suit, I saw the boy he used to be, the boy who once built me a birdhouse from leftover shingles. His eyes found mine only once, during the reading of Thomas's final letter, the one Jonathan had introduced as Exhibit 17. It cleared my husband's name, exposed the laundering ring, and confirmed what we both knew but never said aloud, that Thomas had sinned to protect us. After the verdict, Caleb approached me in the corridor. His voice trembled. "They said I can work with the investigators, help untangle the accounts. Maybe that means something." "It does," I said quietly. "It means you start again." He hesitated. "Can I come home after?" The word home felt like a ghost between us. The house was gone, the walls reduced to ash. I looked at him, this man who had nearly destroyed me, and felt something unfamiliar, not forgiveness, not yet, but the outline of it. "We'll see," I said, "if you keep choosing the truth." Jonathan stood a few paces away, leaning against the wall, watching. He'd been there through every hearing, every deposition, his presence as steady as the mountains behind this town. When Caleb walked off with his probation officer, Jonathan stepped forward. "You did the right thing." "Right doesn't feel right," I said. "It rarely does when it costs you something." He handed me a folder, his final report for the Bureau. "Carver's in federal custody. He's naming names. The Morse estate will be seized and liquidated. You're entitled to restitution. It's not much money, rarely is, after all this, but it's clean." Clean. The word settled heavy in my chest. I didn't ask what he would do next. He had the look of a man who belonged everywhere and nowhere at once, a man whose job was to appear at the moment of collapse and then vanish when the rebuilding began. He offered his hand. "When it's over, you might consider leaving Vermont. You've carried this land long enough." I nodded but said nothing. Some roots don't let go just because someone tells you they should. Weeks passed. The frost left the soil. I went back one morning alone, walking the property line. The apple tree still stood, its bark charred but alive. I knelt beside it and pressed my palm to the trunk. "We made it," I whispered, "all of us who deserved to." That's when I noticed something glinting at the base of the tree, a shard of metal half buried in mud. I dug it free. It was the corner of a small brass box, heat-warped but intact. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a single photograph. Me, Thomas, and a young Caleb standing by the orchard, sunlight pouring through the branches. On the back, Thomas had written in his steady hand, "For when you forget why you stayed." I sat there for a long time, the wind tugging at my hair, the earth damp under my knees. All those years I'd cursed him for his secrecy, for the distance that grew between us after 1994. Now I saw it differently. He had carried the weight alone so I wouldn't have to. and in doing so he had given me the strength to carry what came after. That evening, Jonathan called from Boston. "Morrison's division wants to interview you," he said. "Your testimony's key for the Senate inquiry, but you don't have to do it if you're done being in the storm." I thought about the other women who'd written to me since the case hit the papers, widows, mothers, daughters, each with their own version of a man like Carver, of a son like mine. "No," I said. "I'll testify. Somebody has to tell it right." The hearing took place in June. The room smelled of polished wood and stale coffee. Cameras clicked as I was sworn in, and for the first time in months, my hands didn't shake. They asked about the farm, about Thomas, about how the scheme had worked, but what they really wanted to know was why I hadn't run sooner, why I'd stayed. I looked straight into the microphone and told them the truth. Because women like me were raised to believe silence was strength, because we thought surviving meant staying quiet. I was wrong. Surviving means telling it all. Afterward, as the reporters swarmed, I stepped outside into the humid air. Jonathan was waiting near the steps. "You just made national news," he said with a small smile. "Then maybe someone will listen next time," I replied. He offered me a ride back to the station. The silence between us wasn't heavy, it was companionable, the kind of quiet that exists between people who've survived the same war. When he dropped me off, he said, "Take care of yourself, Marjorie, and take care of that land. It's honest again." Honest. I liked that word better than clean. By late summer, I rebuilt a small house on the edge of the orchard, not as grand as before, but mine in every sense. Rachel visited once, carrying a pie she hadn't baked but wanted credit for. I let her sit on the porch, talk about her new job, her attempts at sobriety, the therapy she and Caleb had started. When she asked if I could ever forgive her, I said, "Forgiveness isn't a door. It's a window you have to open a little at a time." That night, as the sun went down, I took the brass box inside and set it on the mantel. The photo inside glowed in the lamplight. I could almost hear Thomas's voice again, steady and unhurried, telling me that some things are worth saving even when they hurt. In September, a letter arrived from the Bureau. The restitution had been processed, a wire transfer of $4.3 million from the liquidated assets of Morse Industries. I stared at the number, not with greed, but disbelief. After decades of scraping by, of worrying about taxes and feed costs, I had more money than I could ever spend. And yet, it felt weightless. So I did what felt right. I used part of it to rebuild the local library, naming the reading room after Thomas. The rest I put into a foundation for rural women fighting guardianship abuse, the same trap my son had tried to spring on me. When Jonathan heard about it, he sent a single line in a handwritten note. "You turned survival into service. That's the only revenge that lasts." The following winter, I walked through the orchard again. Snowflakes clung to the branches of the old apple tree, catching the light like tiny lanterns. I reached out and touched the bark, scarred but strong. "We're still here," I whispered, "and we're still honest." For the first time since that long, terrifying winter, I felt peace, not the fragile kind that depends on silence, but the real kind that grows when the truth finally stands on its own. The following winter came with an unfamiliar stillness. The investigations had ended, the lawyers had stopped calling, and for the first time in nearly a year, there were no more threats left to brace against. The farm was quiet, but not empty. The sound of hammers echoed from the new barn going up on the east side, and I could finally walk through the orchard without imagining men with flashlights waiting between the trees. Yet peace after war feels almost unnatural. I'd spent months running on fear and purpose, and now that both were gone, I didn't know what to do with my hands. The orchard was recovering faster than I was. Nature has no use for guilt, it simply rebuilds. I spent mornings pruning the damaged branches, tracing the burn scars along the bark where fire had licked but not claimed. Sometimes when the wind moved through the trees, I could almost hear Thomas's voice, that low, steady hum he used to make while sharpening tools. I realized with a kind of soft ache that the land hadn't betrayed me. People had. The soil had only held their secrets. One afternoon, Jonathan came back. I hadn't seen him since the Senate hearing. He looked different, rested, lighter, but still carried the same quiet gravity. "You rebuilt," he said, looking around the property. "I wasn't sure you'd stay." "I wasn't sure either," I admitted, "but this place has a memory longer than mine." He smiled. "You sound like your husband." We walked through the orchard, boots crunching in the frost. He told me Carver had finally been sentenced 25 years, no parole. The papers called it one of the largest financial recovery cases in state history, but what struck me most was what he said next. "Your testimony changed the law. The state's adding new protections for seniors in guardianship cases. They're calling it the Ellis provision." For a moment, I couldn't speak. "He would have liked that," I said softly. "Thomas always believed the land should protect people, not own them." Jonathan glanced at me. "You protected a lot more than land, Marjorie." He left soon after, but his words stayed. The Ellis provision. My name. In print. It didn't feel like victory, it felt like closure, like something had come full circle. The girl who once hid behind a door, afraid of her own son's voice, had been replaced by a woman whose story now stood in law books. In March, I reopened the foundation office in town. We called it the Orchard Trust. It was small at first, just a rented room above the hardware store, 2 volunteers, and a phone that rang more than it should have. But within weeks, letters began to arrive from across the country. Widows who'd been tricked into signing power of attorney papers, daughters cut out of inheritance by predatory relatives, men too ashamed to admit their own children had stolen their savings. Every envelope felt like a mirror of my own story, each one sealed with the same loneliness. I wrote back to all of them, even the ones that only asked for hope. "Document everything," I told them. "Keep your receipts. Keep your dignity. Truth takes time, but it's worth the wait." By June, we had 12 active cases. By September, we had 31. The press called me an advocate, but I didn't see myself that way. I was just tired of seeing silence win. One evening, Caleb came back to the farm. He'd finished his probation, was working part-time with the federal auditors who'd once questioned him. He looked older not by years, but by humility. He stood at the edge of the orchard, hands buried in his pockets. "You planted new ones," he said quietly. "Every spring deserves another chance," I replied. He nodded, staring at the rows of young saplings. "I don't expect you to forgive me." "I already did," I said, "the day you told the truth." He hesitated, then took a folded paper from his coat. "I bought something for you. Nothing big. Just something to start over with." It was a deed, half an acre of land adjoining mine, the piece Carver had tried to claim years before. He'd bought it back under his name, then signed it over to me. I didn't cry. I just reached for his hand, the same hand that once held mine as a child, sticky from apple slices. "It's good land," I said. "We'll keep it honest." That night after he left, I sat by the window watching snow begin to fall. I thought about Thomas, about the lies that had nearly consumed our lives, and about how truth, when finally spoken, didn't destroy us. It purified what was left. Maybe that was what he'd meant all along in that final tape. The land belongs to you because you worked it with clean hands. Years later, people would still stop me in town to ask about the case. Some wanted details, others wanted reassurance that justice really happened. I never told them everything. Some truths don't need to be repeated to be real. But I always said this: you can lose your house, your money, your family's love, but if you hold on to your honesty, you can rebuild all the rest. The orchard bloomed again that spring. Rows of blossoms, white as breath, covering every branch. I walked among them, touching the petals, letting them cling to my gloves. The oldest tree still stood in the center, its trunk blackened by old fire, its limbs twisted with scars. Yet every year, it flowered first. The bees always came to it first. I used to think it was just stubbornness that kept it alive. Now I understood it was endurance, the same thing that keeps women like me standing after storms. When the wind picked up, I could hear the faint rattle of the branches like applause, or maybe just the earth remembering. Either way, it was enough. By the second spring after the fire, the land had found its rhythm again. The orchard no longer felt like a battlefield. It was alive, green, humming with bees and memory. but the peace I'd built was fragile, the kind that trembles when the past stirs its shadow. One April morning, a letter arrived with a federal seal. The return address read, Department of Justice, Burlington Division. I'd thought all of that was behind me. I was wrong. The letter wasn't a summons. It was an invitation to testify in the final restitution hearing against the last of Carver's associates, the men who had fled overseas when the scandal broke. They wanted me to appear in person, not as a victim this time, but as the custodian of evidence. I almost laughed at the phrasing. For 30 years I had guarded this land like it was a living thing. Now the government wanted me to guard its truth, too. I drove to Burlington alone. The road cut through the mountains, the snow melting into rivers that ran alongside the asphalt. Every curve carried me further from the woman I'd been, the one who hid behind her son's shadow, who mistook survival for silence. When I arrived, the courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined, sunlight spilling through high windows. Jonathan was there, of course. He stood when he saw me, smiling in that quiet, reassuring way of his. "Ready?" he asked. "I've been ready for a long time," I said. The proceedings were mostly procedural bank records, signatures, accounts traced across continents. But then came the question that everyone had been waiting for. "Mrs. Ellis," the prosecutor said, "in your opinion, what was the true cost of the Morse and Carver fraud?" I looked around the room, the lawyers, the journalists, the men in suits pretending not to sweat. "The cost," I said, "wasn't just money. It was time. 30 years of fear, of doubt, of a family broken because one man decided he was smarter than conscience. You can recover dollars. You can't recover peace." The judge nodded slowly, spoken like someone who's lived it. When the session ended, Jonathan walked me outside. The spring air was sharp, smelling of thawed earth and something clean. "That was the last piece," he said. "They'll close the case for good now." I should have felt relief. Instead, what I felt was space, a quiet expanse inside me that hadn't existed before. "What will you do next?" I asked him. He smiled. "They've offered me a position in D.C., but I've been thinking about staying closer to the ground for once. Maybe help local investigations. Maybe help your foundation if you'll have me." I didn't answer right away. The thought of him leaving stirred something I hadn't let myself name. The Orchard Trust could use someone who understands the law better than I do, I said finally. "But I can't promise it'll be peaceful work." He laughed softly. "Peaceful's never been my type." That summer, we worked side by side. The foundation grew faster than either of us expected. Letters, donations, phone calls from journalists, even invitations to speak at universities. People wanted to hear the story, but I told them what mattered wasn't the betrayal, it was the rebuilding. "A woman doesn't need revenge to find justice," I'd say in every speech. "She needs a voice that carries further than her fear." In August, the orchard produced its largest harvest in a decade. I hired local families to help, and for the first time since Thomas's death, laughter filled the fields again. Caleb visited often, quiet but steady, repairing fences, driving the old tractor like he used to when he was 16. One evening, as the sun slipped low and turned the leaves to gold, he said, "You ever think Dad knew it would all come out like this?" "I think he hoped," I replied, "and hope's a kind of knowing." We stood there a long time, the hum of crickets rising around us. In September, I received another letter, this one from Washington. The president had signed a proclamation naming October as National Elder Justice Month, inspired in part by the Ellis provision. I read it 3 times before I believed it. The words that had once lived only in my farmhouse now lived in law. My story, Thomas's secrets, even Caleb's repentance, all of it had become something bigger than pain. It had become protection. That same week, Jonathan stopped by the house. "I'm leaving for a few months," he said, "consulting on a fraud case in New York." I poured him coffee, pretending not to feel the hollow forming in my chest. "You'll come back?" "Only if you promise the orchard won't forget me." "The orchard doesn't forget anyone who's done it right," I said. He reached for my hand, just briefly, and his eyes softened. "You've done more than survive, Marjorie. You've changed what survival means." After he left, I walked through the rows of trees. The air was cooling. the scent of apples thick around me. I thought of every version of myself that had walked this land, the young wife, the grieving widow, the frightened mother, the woman who stood in a courtroom and named her truth. They were all here, layered in the soil like the rings of a tree. I stopped beneath the oldest apple tree, its trunk still marked with scars from the fire. The metal drum was gone, the evidence long turned to ash or archive, but its roots still held the memory of everything buried and unearthed. I pressed my palm to the bark, rough and alive. "We did it," I whispered. "We kept the truth standing." When the wind moved through the branches, I could almost hear Thomas's voice again, low and calm. "You were always the strong one." That night, I lit a single lantern on the porch and left it burning until morning, not as a signal of warning this time, but of welcome for whatever came next. The first snow of that year came early, blanketing the orchard in silence. I had always thought snow carried peace, but this time it felt like a curtain closing on a long, relentless play. The storm outside was quiet, but inside my chest there was still a faint hum of unfinished business, the kind of restlessness that comes when justice has been served but healing hasn't. Caleb had been working the land again for several months. He came every weekend, steady, respectful, never expecting more than I was ready to give. Some afternoons we barely spoke, just moved between the trees, pruning branches, clearing debris, but there was a comfort in that silence, a rhythm I hadn't realized I missed. The rhythm of shared work, of bloodlines trying to remember kindness. One evening, as we packed the tools away, he said, "Mom, the Bureau's closing all the accounts. It's over." For good this time. He said it like a man, hoping the word over could erase what came before. I only nodded. "Over doesn't mean gone," I said. "It just means it's time to live with what's left." He didn't answer, but later that night, I found a note on the kitchen table. His handwriting small, careful, the same as when he was 10. "Thank you for not giving up on me. I know I don't deserve another chance, but I'm trying to make one worth your name." I folded the note and kept it in my apron pocket, where I could feel it against my heart when I worked. Winter deepened, the orchard slept, and yet the story that had bound us for years refused to rest. One morning, a call came from Burlington. It was Agent Morrison. "Mrs. Ellis," she said, "we've received a formal request. Carver wants to meet you." I almost laughed. What could he possibly have to say? "He's dying," she said, "and he claims he wants to clear his conscience. You're not obligated, of course." For days I wrestled with it. I'd spent years fearing that man's shadow, and now I was being asked to face him under fluorescent lights and state supervision. But something inside me, the same stubborn thread that had kept me alive through fire, lies, and betrayal, told me I had to go. Closure isn't given, it's claimed. The facility was sterile, humming with quiet menace. Carver was thinner than I remembered, gray seeping into the edges of his voice. He smiled when I entered. "The famous Mrs. Ellis, the woman who outlasted us all." "I didn't outlast anyone," I said. "I just refused to stop standing." He coughed, the sound wet, almost pitiful. "You should thank me, you know. If I hadn't pushed, you'd still be sitting in that farmhouse pretending not to know what your husband did." "My husband protected his family. You destroyed yours," I said evenly. "That's the difference between guilt and greed." For a long moment, he stared at me, and something shifted in his expression, a flicker of respect, maybe, or envy. "They'll write about you," he said finally. "But they'll forget me. That's how it always ends." "I haven't forgotten," I said quietly. "That's what keeps me human." When I left, the snow outside was still falling. I realized then that forgiveness wasn't about him. It was about walking away without needing revenge to stay warm. In early spring, the foundation received its largest grant yet, a partnership with a national legal aid group. Jonathan returned from New York to finalize it. We spent long days drafting documents, long nights talking by the fire. He'd become part of the rhythm, too steady, grounding, someone who didn't need words to understand. One night, after a meeting, he looked at me across the table and said, "You've built something that will outlive us both. But have you built a life for yourself yet?" The question landed harder than I expected. I thought about the orchard, the foundation, the hearings, the speeches. They were all parts of a life, but not the whole of one. "Maybe this is my life," I said. He smiled, just barely. "Then make sure it's yours, not just what's left of everyone else's." That night, after he left, I walked the perimeter of the land. The moon hung low, lighting the snow in silver. I could see the faint outline of new buds already forming on the branches. The apple trees didn't ask permission to bloom again, they just did. That was their rebellion, their mercy, their truth. Maybe it could be mine too. By summer, I decided to sell the upper acres, the part Thomas had always said was too wild for farming. I donated the proceeds to the Orchard Trust and kept the smaller piece for myself, the house, the garden, the oldest tree. The rest would go toward rebuilding lives that hadn't yet found their soil. On the last day before the sale closed, Caleb helped me move a few boxes from the barn. He paused by the tree line and said, "You ever regret staying?" I looked at him and thought of everything: the fire, the courtroom, the orchard blooming again. "No," I said. "Regret is for people who stop too soon." That autumn, the Orchard Trust opened its first national office in Boston. Jonathan insisted I attend the ribbon cutting, though I hated public attention. Cameras flashed, reporters asked questions about legacy and endurance. I said only this: I was never trying to be an example. I was just trying to live without shame. The room fell silent. Maybe they expected something grander. But the truth doesn't need grandeur. It just needs clarity. After the ceremony, Jonathan walked me to the car. "So," he said, "what's next for the great Marjorie Ellis?" I laughed softly. "I think I'll plant one more tree." He looked at me the way people look at sunrise, quiet, reverent, surprised that something ordinary could be so beautiful. "Then I'll help you dig the hole," he said. That evening, back home, the orchard was waiting. I planted a single sapling beside the old tree, its roots intertwining with the past. The soil was cool, forgiving beneath my hands. I stood there until the stars came out, feeling the earth settle around it. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a survivor or a symbol. I felt like a woman who had finally finished burying the dead things and begun tending the living. When the wind moved through the orchard, it carried the scent of blossoms again, clean, honest, unbroken. The years that followed felt like a long exhale after holding my breath for too long. By then, the orchard was more than land, it was a chronicle. Every tree bore a scar or a blossom from the story we had lived through, and every path between them carried echoes of what we had survived. The morning light that once felt like interrogation now felt like mercy. It touched the windows gently, as if the world had finally decided to let me rest. The foundation thrived without needing me to drive it anymore. Young women took over its leadership: law students, accountants, and a few mothers who had once written to me for help. They called me Mrs. Ellis for the longest time, until I told them to stop. "Just Marjorie," I said. "I've had enough titles in my life: survivor, widow, founder. Let's leave the rest to history." Every Friday, I still walked the perimeter of the land. I would check the fences, trace the bark of the old apple tree, and kneel to pull weeds. Work was how I prayed, slowly, silently, with dirt under my fingernails and breath in my lungs. It was a way of remembering that even after a life of lies, something pure could still grow. One afternoon, while sorting through old files for the Foundation archives, I found the last cassette, the one Jonathan had handed me months before he left for Washington. I had never played it. Part of me was afraid of what Thomas's voice might still hold. But that day, with the sun slanting across the table and the orchard murmuring outside, I decided it was time. His voice came through faint, worn by age and dust, but unmistakable. "If you're hearing this, Marge," he said, "then the world has already found the truth. Maybe I'm gone. Maybe you're older than we ever planned. But if the orchard still stands, it means we did something right. You always said I worked the soil like a man burying secrets. Maybe I was. But I was also planting forgiveness. For you. For our son. For myself. You'll know when it's time to let go of what's left of me." I turned off the tape and sat in the silence that followed. The air felt full, not of ghosts, but of understanding. Thomas wasn't asking for pardon, he was giving it. That night, I lit a lantern and walked to the orchard. The moon was full, laying a silver sheen over the snow. I stopped beneath the oldest tree, the one that had outlived fires, storms, and betrayal. "I forgive you," I whispered into the cold air. "And I forgive myself." The branches creaked above me, a sound like wood settling, but to me, it felt like an answer. In spring, the Orchard Trust reached its 10th anniversary. The local paper ran a story about it, calling me the woman who turned secrets into seeds. They sent a young journalist to interview me. She couldn't have been older than 25, full of certainty and caffeine. "What do you think your legacy is, Mrs. Ellis?" she asked. I smiled. Legacy is a word for people who think they're finished. I'm not finished, but if you mean what I've learned, it's this. Truth isn't about punishment. It's about freedom. Sometimes it frees others, sometimes it frees you, and if you're lucky, it frees both. The story went viral. Funny how the world only listens when it's already decided what you represent. But I didn't mind. Every version of me, the broken, the angry, the unrelenting, had served its purpose. By the time summer came, Caleb had moved into a small cottage by the lake. He was teaching high school history, of all things. On weekends, he'd come by with groceries and stories about his students. We didn't talk about the past much anymore. We didn't need to. It had been absorbed into the rhythm of our days, like background music you no longer consciously hear but would miss if it stopped. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching fireflies rise from the grass, he said, "You ever think about selling the farm? You could move into town, get some rest." I looked out over the rows of trees, heavy with fruit. And what would I rest from? This is the only place that ever kept me honest. He nodded, understanding. Then he added, "When I was little, I used to think the orchard was endless, like it could go on forever." "It does," I said. "Just not always in the way you think. Some trees grow in the ground, others grow in the people who remember them." Years later, when I was well into my 70s, the state invited me to speak at a university commencement. I almost declined, but then I thought of all the women who would never get to tell their stories. So I stood at the podium, hands trembling only slightly, and said what had taken me a lifetime to learn. "Courage isn't loud," I told them. "It's quiet. It's the moment you decide to open your mouth after years of being told to keep it shut. It's walking back into your own house, even when someone tried to burn it down. It's loving your child without letting him destroy you. If you remember nothing else, remember this: survival is only half the story. The rest is what you do with it." After the applause faded, I went home to the orchard. The first blossoms were out again, white and fragile against the blue dusk. I walked to the center and stood beneath the tree where it had all begun. A new sapling grew beside it now, the one I'd planted with Jonathan that last spring before he left. It was taller than me, its branches already reaching for the sky. I pressed my hand against its trunk, feeling the heartbeat of something that would outlive us all. "You see?" I said softly, as if speaking to Thomas, to Caleb, to every woman who'd ever written me a letter. Nothing we plant in truth ever really dies. The wind carried the scent of apple blossoms down the hill, over the house, across the fields. And for the first time in decades, I felt no weight in my chest, only air, clean and wide, and the quiet knowledge that the story was finally complete. When you strip away the secrets, the crimes, and the betrayals, what remains in Marjorie Ellis's story is not tragedy but transformation. It's the portrait of a woman who refused to let deceit define her final chapter. The world around her tried to convince her that age made her invisible, that silence was safety, that family loyalty meant submission, yet she chose differently. She faced the fire, literally and figuratively, and learned that truth, once spoken, doesn't just destroy, it rebuilds. From the ashes of her home rose an orchard that became a symbol of justice and endurance, a living testimony that integrity, even when it costs you everything, gives back something priceless: peace. Marjorie's journey reminds us that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it looks like showing up to the same field every morning, tending what's left, and believing that something honest can still grow there. It's about understanding that forgiveness isn't surrender, it's the decision to stop letting the worst people in your story hold the pen. Her life proves that one voice, no matter how old or tired, can still reshape laws, expose corruption, and inspire thousands. The deeper lesson here is timeless. We all have an orchard to protect something that represents our truth, dignity, or legacy. It might be a family, a belief, or simply the courage to stand up for ourselves. Like Marjorie, we have to decide whether we'll bury the truth to keep peace or unearth it to plant justice. In a world where deceit often feels easier, her story is a quiet rebellion, urging us to keep our hands and our hearts clean, no matter how messy life becomes. For anyone watching today, ask yourself, what would you protect if the price of silence was your soul? Would you stand for truth, even if it meant standing alone? Now, I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you were in Marjorie's place, would you have stayed and fought for the truth, or walked away to start over somewhere new? Which choice do you think brings more peace in the long run? Share your answer in the comments. I truly want to know what you think. And if you enjoyed this story, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us keep creating heartfelt stories like this. Stories that remind us it's never too late to choose courage over comfort and truth over fear.